Holy shit balls.
Oh, mon bonhomme.
Hey guys, what's going on? Chris here as always with Shughead Gaming, and welcome to my review for Kona, developed by Parabol and released on the PSVR June 19th. The VR bundle retails for approximately $26, of course depending on your region. Kona is a detective game set in Canada in the 1970s that sees you play as private investigator Carl Fubert, who arrives at a snowy, sleepy town in northern Quebec on the order of his client, only to find the place practically deserted and with something sinister afoot. Does this walking simulator slash murder mystery slash survival game give us PSVR owners another full game to jump into? Let's find out. As always guys, if you like this video, hit that like button, and if you want to see more PSVR content from me, you know the deal. Please consider subscribing, and for updates, hit that bell icon. Graphics are up first. As a VR patch of the previously released standard PS4 version of the said game, Kona will no doubt get some serious comparisons to the also recently released VR patch of Obduction. Obduction was a train wreck of a VR conversion, and while Kona is a substantially superior VR port, it unfortunately does share some of the same issues that arise when cramming an open world, current-gen game into the limitations of the PSVR. Right off the top, you'll notice that the graphics are cluttered with jagged edges in what appears to be a complete lack of anti-aliasing. Textures are blurry and just lack an overall polish. This is unfortunate as this really hurts the immersion factor in a game that is obviously all about atmosphere and immersion in this lonely world. Draw distance is extremely poor, but outside of the first scene in the game, the eventual snowstorm you find yourself in does a wonderful job covering up most of this shortcoming. Interiors of buildings do fare better, as is expected, but unfortunately these aren't a drastic improvement and you'll still spend the majority of your time running around the forests of Quebec looking at jagged edges. Where the low fidelity assets and jagged edges really hurt the game is when you are required to read items, letters, or even open up your map, all of which are essential to completing the mission and navigating the world. This was maddening and inexcusable. This may sound a little doom and gloom, and while it isn't pretty and the downgraded graphics really do hurt the experience, we still aren't talking the shit the bed levels that Obduction hit. Kona does have full locomotion options and the visual blinders can be removed, both of which Obduction could not deliver on graphically, and this greatly improves the visual presentation and the overall gameplay. But overall the sum is greater than the parts, and while the visuals when looked at individually are not very good, the lighting and overall atmosphere of this desolate, snowstorm-beaten wilderness is intact, and once you just accept the graphics for what they are, you might be able to simply look beyond the graphical shortcomings. Might. Sound is up next.
This deep in the country, his last hope was to find an abandoned garage or a farm by the roadside. His life depended on it.
Lonely desolation, check. Vicious snowstorm blizzard, check. Yep, Kona nails these two important sound cues. At times when walking around the snow-drenched forest, I was almost deafened by the blistering snowstorm I was walking in. Walking inside a cabin was the complete opposite, and I almost expected to hear my ears ringing as I entered the silence of an empty house. Other sounds fare well and help to fill in the required world sounds. The crackle of a lit fire makes you feel warm, and the ramblings of a French hermit sound authentic. Music is kept to a minimum and really only crops up at the menu or in a nearby AM radio. The real audio standout is the continual narration as you progress through the game, coming off as more of a action-specific audiobook reading. The narrator will progress the story and through narration give subtle hints as to where to go and what to do. While I wasn't really a huge fan of this hand-holding storytelling technique, it did, however, create a unique atmosphere, and the voice work was done just fine. While the audio was fairly decent across the board, my one complaint would be the lack of proper 3D audio support, as the blistering snowstorm, while loud and realistic, still never sounded like it surrounded me and swirled all around. This is a small nitpick, but I still expected more after being treated to the soundscapes of a game, say like the Solace Project. Gameplay is next. Kona is at its core a narrated interactive murder mystery. Sprinkle in some very basic survival aspects, some simple puzzles, and place it in a kinda open world, and you have an idea of what you're getting into. Clocking in around 5 to 7 hours in gameplay length, you will spend the majority of your time driving down snowy roads, investigating abandoned houses and snow-swept trails, all in an attempt to discover clues and piece together what has occurred in this quiet town. If the story and the mystery is what you're coming to this game for, then this might be for you. Unfortunately, if it's a survival game, look elsewhere. Staying warm is the extent of your survival requirements, and once into the game, you receive clothing that basically eliminates this need as well. Puzzles are mostly collect that, read this, and do a thing. All these mechanics together make for a decent experience, but it's the atmosphere and the story that the game is built on, so know what you're getting into. The game can be played with either the DS4 or 2 Move controllers. Since moving your hands around and using items is part of the game, I went with the 2 Move controllers, and these worked about as well as any Move controller-based full locomotion game in VR does. That means it works, but it's not without its issues. Face buttons on the left hand move back and forth, while the face buttons on the right hand handle the locked-in click turning of the left and right. One thing I disliked was the strafing left and right is locked to the head instead of the usual waving of a hand. However, one thing I loved was the ability to run and how stamina was linked to your character's warmth. Besides a few hiccups, tracking is fine and the game can easily be played seated with a minimal space requirement. Motion sickness could be an issue for some, but the baked-in click turning as well as optional blinders and teleportation should mitigate these issues for most. And that brings us to fun factor and my final verdict. Kona was a surprise VR patch for most PSVR headset owners. Usually that's a sign that the game isn't good and it's just being put out to die. While Kona certainly has its graphical issues, it's not the shit show that Obduction was. If the story is what you're here for, then the game mechanics should only help to enrich the experience. The puzzles aren't hard and the survival aspect isn't too demanding. And this is in no way an action game, so know that. So come for the story and stay for the atmosphere, and don't look too hard at the graphics. Anyways, guys, I hate rating scales, and I review games based on a scale of buy, wait for a sale, or burn it to the ground. This is a mixed bag for me, especially since I'm not traditionally a big story guy in games. Regardless, I'm still saying this is a wait for a sale for anyone not really enthused by the story premise and walking through a 5-hour snowstorm. There's a decent game here for some, but for many the slow pace, undercooked game mechanics, and weak graphics aren't worth the current asking price. Anyways, guys, that's it for me. If you like this video, hit that like button. And if you want to see more PSVR content, please consider subscribing and hit that bell icon for updates. Like I said, it's a busy week in PSVR, so stay tuned for my next video.